Hiya, folks. Welcome back to the View podcast, a special edition this week to have a chat with a football finance expert on what's going on with Leeds United and all the rumours and fan questions that are going around. Rather than listening to my take on things, we'll get a man who knows exactly what he's talking about when it comes to football finance. So I'm delighted to be joined by Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you? And thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks very much for the invite. Yeah, I'm good. Well, the weather's sunny. We've got a little gap in the football world between the end of the Euros and the start of the season, but it's that gap gets smaller and smaller each year, so make the most of it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a busy calendar. It gets busier and busier every single season. How are you feeling about Brighton's chances to start the season? Are you good pre-season so far?
We've had a good pre-season. We went on a tour of Japan. I think we won 5-1 and 4-2, but nobody knows what to expect. There's a new manager. He's only 31, so he's younger than the captain. He's younger than James Milner and Danny Welbeck and a few of the other senior pros. So it will either be very, very good or we'll get relegated. I don't think it'd be boring because he seems to play with a 3-1-6 formation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff, and I suspect we'll get worked out quite easily on the basis of that. But I can't see too many 0-0 draws.
Well, I know when we did it with Bielsa, it made for very attractive and exciting football most of the time, especially in the Premier League when towards the back end of the last season. But yeah, well, fingers crossed. I always liked Brighton as a club, very well run club on paper. You guys do all the right things and have a sugar daddy in Chelsea always waiting in the wings if you need to bring in some extra cash for a cycle.
That's right. God bless Todd Bowling. Never thought I'd say that. I still hate Chelsea though.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like minds on that one. Kieran, I want to just kind of have a kind of a calm conversation with you just around some of the questions that people are asking around 49ers and the investment in Leeds and then the whole PSR situation around the club. We've heard lots of things over the course of the summer. At the end of last season, we knew by not getting promoted, there was going to be an issue. And Parag Marathe said himself there would be some trade-offs because of that and refused to rule out the sale of Archie Gray because of that. He's sold. We're kind of okay to a degree, not happy about it, but understand that it was the only offer on the table and there was a PSR deadline. Everyone's asking the question, can you explain to people in simple terms, what is PSR to fans or to football clubs and what constitutes profit versus loss?
Okay. Under the Premier League rules, you're allowed to lose £105 million over a 3-year period. Now, that works out as £35 million for every year that you're in the Premier League. If you're in the Championship, again, you're assessed over 3 years, but you're allowed to lose £13 million for every year that you're in the Championship and 35 for every year in the Premier League. So if we take a look at Leeds United for the year ended the 30th of June, 2024, they will have just had 1 year in the Championship, 2 years in the Premier League. So they would have been allowed a PSR loss of £83 million. Now, what constitutes a profit or a loss? It's the total income generated by the club from ticket sales, from the broadcast deal, from your front of shirt deal, your kit manufacturing deal, all the commercial deals, plus any player sale profits. And then you take away from that the biggest cost of a football club is your wages cost. You've then got your transfer costs via what we call amortization. And then you've got the usual sort of running costs of a business, insurance, maintenance, electricity, and so on. So that's where we are. And then you look at the accounts for the last 3 years. So if we take a look at Leeds United for the 3 years ended the 30th of June, 2023, they lost £76 million over that period. So they're well within the limits. But those are 3 Premier League seasons. Now, you can make further adjustments if you spend money on infrastructure, if you've got a women's team, if you've got an academy, if you've got a community scheme, all those costs are ignored for PSR purposes. So you start off with the accounting loss, and then you add back your academy costs, your women's team costs, and so on.
Thank you first for that. That's a very clear version of it. The question will come around investor money in this as well, because obviously the 49ers Enterprises is an investment fund that they've created in order to purchase Leeds United and to run Leeds United. Then you add into it the Red Bull situation that came in this summer, which a lot of fans are wary about because of their history in Germany with tampering with clubs' history. And I think from one side of it, you kind of look at it from an investment perspective and how successful their teams are with a positive eye, but at the same time, you don't want to take the other eye off of what has happened in the past with Red Bull. But that money's come in and has been seen as a really big investment, and we won't see probably exactly what that is until the finances are released in the new year. But in terms of that investment, there's a lot of question marks around, have they just bought into the 49ers Enterprises fund, or have they brought shares in Leeds United outside of that fund? I'm not sure how aware of that situation you are, but that would relate then to, well, how much of that money coming in can then go back out in terms of player sales or player purchases?
Right. It's a really critical issue. If the 49ers Enterprises have sold some of their shares to Red Bull Enterprises, for want of a better phrase, then that has no impact upon the club's finances, it has no impact upon the club's cash flow, it has no impact upon PSR. If, however, Leeds United Football Club has issued fresh shares to Red Bull, then the football club would have received the cash instead of the 49ers, and the money from Red Bull will go into the day-to-day running of the club, and that's included within that 105 million pounds. So it's messy and it's complicated as to which elements are included and which elements are excluded, but the chances are, in my view, Parag McGrath is a smart cookie, that he will have set it up in such a way to have maximum benefit for the football club in terms of flexibility within the PSR limits.
With that then being said, there's a question mark, and there are a portion of fans that ask this question on a regular basis or will allude to this, what's referred to as the 49ers asset stripping Leeds United, that if we look at the sales that we've done so far with Archie and Cree, that they're actually taking that money out of the club and it's not going into the club, and that Red Bull's investment went straight in their back pocket and never went into the club. Now, what you're saying then would suggest that that isn't the case. And again, just from my own perspective of knowing the level of finances that these individuals have investing into Leeds, how much it costs to buy Leeds United, the day-to-day running of the club, also the fact that they're down 150 million from relegation from the Premier League and then missing out on it again last year. There's probably pennies left to pay anybody. But in terms of that asset stripping thought that people have, does that hold any water for you?
For me, the asset stripping allegation is bollocks. And the reason why I say that is that when Leeds were relegated, and I know Leeds fans got angry with me when I put this out after the playoffs, what I'd seen was that during the period of time that Leeds United were getting promoted. So if you take a look at the season in which they did go up, they spent 45 million pounds in the Championship signing players. And then if you take a look at the 3 seasons in the Premier League, Leeds United spent 355 million pounds buying players, but a lot of those purchases were on credit. So by the time they were relegated at the end of 2023, whilst they'd spend a lot of money on players, they'd run up a huge debt on the club credit card, around about 190 million pounds. So any money which would have been coming in from player sales during 23-24, and also what we've seen over the course of the summer of 24-25, that money would mainly be focused on paying off existing transfer fee installments to players that Leeds signed during their time in the Premier League.
So that's the amortization payments that we hear about on a regular basis.
Well, it's not even. It's not. I mean, amortization is not a cash cost. And my background is in. I used to work for a firm of administrators, and I've looked at done investigations into football clubs when I was younger, a lot younger to be fair. And football clubs are spectacularly bad at managing cash. So I always focus on cash flow, and that was my concern, as well as owing 190 million pounds in terms of transfer fees, Leeds also run up debts of around about £80 million in terms of loans. Now, some of those loans were internal, effectively, to 49ers. And I don't think 49ers would not be allowed to, under FIFA rules, to prioritise player sales going into 49ers as opposed to paying off existing transfer fee creditors.
Yeah. So as thought, there's zero evidence and facts to actually back up a statement that the 49ers, at least right now, are asset stripping the club, because there really isn't a whole lot of money to take out of the club in the first place.
Yeah. That Leeds, when they were relegated, had £1.5 million in the bank. And also, I think what people have to realise is that when they sold Archie Gray to Spurs, I don't know the exact details of the fee. Was it 30 million? Was it 40 million? But I can assure you, I've seen the way that Spurs operate when it comes to player purchases, and they either get a big discount on the transfer fee if they pay all of the amount up front, which isn't their normal method of doing things, or the transfer fee payments will be spread over 3 or 4 years. So when they signed, for example, when they signed James Maddison from Leicester the previous summer, when Leicester were relegated, that was a £40 million fee. Spurs only paid 13, and then they paid another 13 12 months later, which is now, and they'll pay another 13 million in the summer of 2025. So just because you've got a player sale for 30 or 40 million is not the same as receiving cash. 99% of transfer deals, as far as the Premier League are concerned, are done on a credit basis. You do get a few cash deals, but that's normally because the selling club is so desperate for cash that it says, well, yeah, we're looking for 50 million, but if you give us 40 million now, we'll accept it because we've got bills to pay.
Yeah. You mentioned the credit card, the infamous Leeds United credit card, or Radrizzani's credit card. Daniel Farke made a comment after their last preseason friendly against Valencia, where he basically said Chris Somerville will go this weekend, which we then saw happen, but Leeds would still be paying for some of the sins of the past, referring to the Radrizzani Orta era and how they financed deals for Leeds United. One of the questions I've been getting a lot from people is, how long is this going to go on for? Or realistically, how long can the current ownership lean back to the previous ownership and say, well, it's not our fault, it's the previous ownership's fault?
Well, if you take a look at most deals, they're normally over 2 or 3 seasons. Occasionally, I've seen some spread over 5, but I would imagine, given that Leeds had to spend, I think it was had to repay around about 70 million of that 190. To me, that's looking at probably a 3-year payment period. So you look at the debts from 2023; those will be cleared by 2026. So that there is a legacy. There is a sort of we're seeing sort of the tip of the iceberg with regards to the club's finances, and it's only when you go into the small print and you dig out some of those numbers. As recently as 2018, Leeds only owed £3 million to other clubs for outstanding transfer fees. Between 2018 and 2023, that £3 million have gone up to 190. So it was clearly a strategy undertaken by Radrizzani, and Leeds are not the worst. If you look at Chelsea's accounts, Chelsea owe over £500 million in terms of, and it's another reason to hate Chelsea. And I appreciate, as Leeds fans, you don't need any excuse to hate that club. But Chelsea have taken this approach of using the club credit card and then selling the women's team to themselves, and the car park to themselves, and hotels they own to themselves, and so on.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, a scary one. But if you were to look at it and look at what's gone on so far this summer, Leeds have brought in close to £80 million in player sales. You've then had the Red Bull investment, but also the sponsorship deal that's gone along with that for the front of shirt sponsorship. You add to that Russell Crowe has some level of investment gone into the club, and then you add in the Archie Gray sale for 40 million, but take 10 out of that for Joe Rodon coming the other way. And then you've got the Crescencio Somerville deal, which for some reason Leeds have asked for the details of that transfer to be kept private for now anyway, but I'm sure we'll see more of that once the finances are released. If you take all of that in and you look at the PSR situation, do Leeds have anything to worry about? Because Daniel Farke did say again at the weekend that Leeds are operating within limited resources this summer. despite the fact Parag Marathe had said earlier on this summer that every piece of investment that Leeds get would go straight back onto the pitch. And that seems to be contradictory.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, if we take a look at the front of shirt deal, a record front of shirt deal in the Championship would probably be worth around about £2 million. So it's not the Premier League, where Leeds would have been looking for somewhere, in my view, between say 12 and 15. There are clubs in the Premier League themselves that have only got front of shirt deals worth 5 or 6 million, and that tends to be with gambling companies. You can effectively knock off a zero when you get relegated to the Championship in terms of the value of the deals. So if Leeds are getting 2 million, say even 3 million pounds from Red Bull by Championship standards, that's an absolutely brilliant piece of work, because you've got your first opponents at Ellen Road this season. I believe it's Portsmouth. They're sponsored by the University of Portsmouth. That will be valued in tens of thousands. Universities have got no money. They wouldn't be putting a lot of money into a front of shirt deal. So I think people are getting a little bit confused when it comes to scale. What is fantastic by Championship standards, and I can assure you that Leeds United will have more money than any other team from their commercial arm this season in the Championship, and they will probably generate more money than half the teams in the Premier League as well. That's a reflection of the size of the brand. And I know as a football fan, you probably bristle when I use words like that, but that's what you've got to see it as. So the Adidas deal will be good because the shirts will fly off the shelves, as we know. But a good deal in the Championship, we are talking single millions. So if fans are saying, well, hold on, we've sold players for 80, we've only brought in 15. If you sold players for 80 and those are all on 3-year payment deals, then you've got, what, £25 million of cash coming in. You look at the position with regards to Leeds United wage bill. When they were relegated, they had a pretty big wage bill. They were averaging 74 grand a week in the Premier League. That's by non-Big Six standards, that's very competitive. It's twice the level of some of the clubs, the likes of Brentford and so on. It's probably 30 million more than the team I support, Brighton, and so on. So they did have a big wage bill. That big wage bill would have been carried across to the Championship. I appreciate a lot of players went out on loan. I appreciate that some players have left, but Leeds will still be one of the big payers as far as the EFL Championship are concerned, and trying to get that wage bill down will be a challenge over the course of this window, and ideally next summer you'll be back in the Premier League and it won't be a problem.
Ideally, yeah. I want to ask you a question on that as well in a second. From a fan's perspective, Kieran, what does the Red Bull investment actually mean to fans? Because as it was explained to us, it's a big deal, a big company, global brand, taking a stake in the club as well as the sponsorship. From a fan's perspective, what should we actually be expecting from this realistically?
I don't think you'd expect to see much change. Red Bull know that if they try to impose the Red Bull brand on Leeds United, there will be a huge reaction from the fan base. And we saw this when Mike Ashley tried to do similar with St James's Park and called it the Sports Direct Arena. That didn't last very long. So Red Bull are not stupid. At the same time, they are a big brand in their own right. They do have interest in 2 other football clubs. Those clubs do okay. There's no doubt about it, but they're not trailblazers in terms of success, either domestically or within Europe. So it's a helping hand. I think for me, the big issue is Leeds have managed to get in early with a non-gambling sponsor. So again, I'm looking here for positives, assuming that Leeds United will be in the Premier League next season. We've only got 1 year remaining from next season when you can actually have front of shirt gambling sponsors. So by finding an alternative a year early, my view is that it's smart business And just because it's smart business doesn't necessarily mean that it's fantastic from a fan's point of view. Because let's be honest, we don't care about investment. We care about sugar daddies when it comes to football club ownership. I don't care about the background. We say that sustainability is really important, and I've certainly seen things when my club's nearly gone out of business. You think about what's happened with Leeds United as well historically, when the club went through some really rough periods with really awful owners. But secretly, we want somebody to do an Abramovich or to do a Sheikh Mansour, and just to go and ply us with millions upon millions, tens, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of spending, and ideally on good players, because as we've seen with Everton, if you buy shite, you're not going to necessarily go up the table. All you're going to be left with is a hell of a hangover, and that's the danger if things don't work out.
Ken, if you were a Leeds fan, would you be worried about the club's finances, seeing what you've seen this summer, or would you view it from a point of view of there's a bit of a hangover from the previous ownership that's going to take a little bit of time to iron out, but it's okay?
Yeah, it would be the latter. Are Leeds on my list of? I've got a little notebook of clubs who I'm worried about going into administration. Leeds aren't in that, and they haven't been on it either. As far as the Radrizzani regime was concerned, I know he's a divisive figure. He ran a fairly tight ship. And if you take a look at the years when Leeds were previously in the Championship, in a division where the vast majority of clubs were spending far more on wages than they were generating in income, Leeds United wasn't one of those clubs. They lived within their means. Yes, they spent more money in order to get promoted in 2019-20, but that was partly due to the fact that bonuses would have been somewhere in the region of 12 to 15 million pounds that season, because that's how player contracts work.
Yeah, it's an interesting question on the back of that about other Championship clubs. We've seen West Brom already go into a transfer embargo straight away. Hull City have spent pretty big in the last 2 transfer windows to try and push them up the table. From a Championship perspective, Kieran, are there other clubs in the Championship that are likely to follow the same way as West Brom this year? It seems like everyone's kind of minding the pennies at the moment.
Yeah, Sheffield United have got issues. There's no doubt about that. The vast majority of clubs have wages which exceed revenues. You've got 3 clubs who are coming down, who I think have taken a fairly conservative approach to their spending whilst in the Premier League. So they've probably got a bit of leeway, but you've got to box really clever. I think Sheffield United have got some sort of suspended sentence. West Brom are being sanctioned, but they're not being sanctioned. What does that mean? My understanding is what they effectively have to do is that if they're thinking about trying to sign player X, they phone up the EFL, say, this is the deal. The EFL will say, well, we don't think that's a very good idea, because if you do, based on our calculations, you'll go over the limit. So therefore, they've had to go and temper their level of expenditure. I think the Championship is in a better position than it has been for a few seasons, but even so, it's not good. The average losses in the Championship are 400 grand a week, and if you're the owner of Bristol City and you've been losing 400 grand a week for the last 10 years, you've got to ask yourself at some point in time, why the bejesus am I doing this? It's a very expensive hobby, and that's what it is to these billionaires. Owning a football club's a hobby.
Yeah. Well, some of them use it and are very clear it's a hobby when you see how they spend the money in the clubs as well. Now they manage them. Kieran, PSR is obviously going to dominate for a while. There's conversations in the Premier League around a new model and we spoke on this before on the Or to Know Better podcast, but it was like, it feels like PSR sanctions means the PSR is starting to work correctly, but now everybody's got a problem with it. But it also seems to kind of frozen the elite exactly where they were, and it's kind of stopping anybody else getting in there. Aston Villa being a prime example, finally get into Champions League and have to sell some of their best players immediately then just to balance the books. There's talk of a change, and where do you see this being in the next 4 or 5 years in terms of a financial model in the Premier League and Championship?
I think there will be a change as far as the calculations are concerned. But as far as the impact on being able to be a club that is aspirational, to be a club that wants to appreciate in terms of its annual position in the Premier League or wherever, I don't see much of a change. And the reason for that is that if we take a look at the proposed rules, which are effectively that they're going to mirror the rules of UEFA. And if we keep it relatively simple, let's assume that you can spend 70% of your revenue from your three main sources: ticket sales, commercial, TV, and player sale profit. So you work out that total. The way it's going to work in the Premier League is that if you're playing in Europe, you can spend 70% of that on player wages, what we call transfer fee amortization, player write-downs, and agents' fees. If you're not in Europe, you can spend 85%. So if we take two clubs at random, let's take first of all Manchester City. Manchester City, and let's not go down the avenue as to, well, is that money legit or what? Yeah, let's just take a look at it purely from a spreadsheet point of view. Manchester City generated £700 million of revenue. And I mean, not even including player sales. And they had Manchester City are much smarter at selling players than anybody gives them credit for, by the way. So they've got 700 million. You say, well, what's 70% of that? It's 490 million. So, okay, so they can spend 490 million on players, transfer fees, wages, blah, blah, blah. If you're Newcastle United, they probably generated 250 million last year. Now they want to get more, and they can spend, let's just take 75%. Let's assume that they're in Europe. 70% of 250 million is 175 million. So they are starting the season at a 300 million pound disadvantage to Manchester City. So how do you get up? People say, well, it'll take time. The rules are there to allow clubs. That's nonsense. Because if you've got a big six who are somewhere between probably 150 to 300 million pounds ahead of you at the start of each season, you can't break into that big six. Yeah. So that's where my reservations kick in. UEFA have given in. They've given concession after concession after concession to something called the ECA, the European Club Association. Now, the ECA says, well, hold on, we've got 200, 250 members, and they have, but just count how many of those members have shares who can actually vote. Yeah. So you can't be a diner unless you're allowed to dine. It's always been my view. And effectively, the smaller clubs in Europe, yes, they're allowed in the restaurant, but they just have to go and sit around and watch everybody else eat. And I'm sorry for all these metaphors.
Sit at the bar while you're waiting on a table, which may never come.
Right, yes. So the reason why UEFA has given away all these concessions is because it still fears some form of breakaway competition. So it's the elephant in the room. It's the monster that won't die. Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street. It just keeps coming back in different shapes, or the threat of it keeps coming back. And in order to keep the bigger clubs happy, UEFA says we'll try to create a situation, we'll try to create competitions which will ensure that you've got an advantage. If you take Manchester United, take the clubs that have qualified for the Champions League, and Leeds United this season, realistically, they're going to have 34 million pounds in parachute payments. They'll get another, say, 5 million from the EFL for the TV deal, so that's 40. They'll get commercial income, I would imagine, of at least 30 million, and then they'll get gate receipts, which 25 to 30. So they'll be, by championship standards, they'll be getting 80 to 90 million pounds. You then look at what you've got for qualifying for the Champions League. You're now guaranteed 4 home matches Manchester United make £5 million in ticket sales on each home match. So they're going to get £20 million from the European matches. You get an entry fee for the Champions League of 30 million. And then what people don't realise is that the UEFA coefficients kick in, and they rank all of the 36 teams that are in the Champions League and are in the UEFA conference. And in the Champions League, you get £1 million per place. So if you're the worst team in Europe qualifying for Europe, you'll get an extra 1 million. If you're Real Madrid or Manchester, well, it will be Real Madrid, you start off with £36 million. That's more money than Leeds United are going to generate from commercial income before a ball is kicked.
Yeah.
So it just preserves the existing status quo, and that is on the back of a bigger European competition, which, to my knowledge, no fan has asked for.
Or once, when it was suggested, there was fan outrage about it as well. It's a strange one, Kieran, because on paper, and having listened to what you've said, it would seem that if you're a Premier League club that are not in that top six, this is a bad deal, as was the previous deals. They're not good deals. But yet you see Premier League clubs repeatedly voting in favour of these, and you wonder, if I'm a mid to lower table club, surely I would be against this and looking for a deal that would be better in place. But it kind of sounds like European clubs are in an abusive relationship, or UEFA are in an abusive relationship with a handful of clubs who just threaten to leave every time they don't get what they want. Why would any club vote in favour of a deal like this if you're not top six?
Because they see it as least bad. I'm not being disrespectful to my club or to Bournemouth or to Palace or to Wolves or to Fulham. I don't know anybody that's going to spend £100 million a year giving them money to go and play football, with the exception of Sky.
Yeah.
So what else can they do? One of the big fears, I think, amongst those smaller clubs is that if they kick up too much of a fuss, then the bigger clubs will effectively take their ball home and say, right, we're going to pull out of the Sky deal. And what we're now going to do is that we're going to sell our own TV rights direct to the fan. And I've got very little time for glory-seeking fans. Yeah, I live in Sussex. I see a variety of shirts on clubs, and I think we wouldn't even have to find Manchester on a map, pal. And I lived in Manchester for 40 years, and I've worked in Liverpool for 30. And the local fans, just like the local fans of any club, huge respect for football's as much to do with pain as it is to do with glory. But you do have that sense of identity with your club. That's not the case with a lot of the tourist fans. But equally, Manchester United can earn a fortune more if they did sell their rights direct to fans, because they've got fans on all 5 continents. They've got fan clubs in practically every country in the world, and they'll pay £10, £15, £20 a month, or whatever it's going to be. And when you start to add up the numbers, you realise just how beneficial that could be.
Yeah, it'd be huge amounts of money, especially for certain clubs, but not for all clubs. That's the problem. Again, it's an uneven playing field. Can I ask you more question about the Premier League, and then one final question on Leeds, and I'll let you go because I know you're a busy man. Looking at the American ownership in the Premier Division right now, there's roughly about 9 or 10 clubs currently owned by American owners. Leeds obviously have one as well, so if they go into the Premier League, that increases that again. Todd Bowley has some fantastic ideas around what football in England should look like based on American models of football. There's talk around more games being played in America, or kicking the season off in the States. And at the moment, it's been kind of pushed down and refused by fans. The more American ownership, especially franchise ownership from the States, increases in the Premier League, the voting then will significantly shift in their favour. If you were a Premier League fan, would you be concerned about increasing the amount of American owners, or do you have faith in the Premier League and the FA to be able to control what really happens down the road?
No, I've got no faith in the Premier League, and the reason for that is ultimately the Premier League is a members' club. It's got 20 shareholders, and if 14 of those vote for X, then you get X. Now, once you reach that critical mass of American owners, And not all of them, to be fair, are in favour of playing matches elsewhere. Because I saw Bill Foley at Bournemouth say he thought it was a crap idea. But trying to work out the politics of the Premier League, because if you can just go and play, if you're going to be given £2-3 million a match to turn up and play in the States, and then Saudi Arabia says, "Well, hold on, we'll give you 10." Then I know where Newcastle are going to be putting their vote. And we saw last season when Sheffield United started voting in favour of decisions which just happened to be exactly the same way that Newcastle United wanted, and you go, "Oh, hold on, Prince Abdullah, Sheffield United, where's he from? It's not from Rotherham or Barnsley, that's for sure."
No.
So there's a huge amount of politics involved. I fear that we've lost the battle with regards to overseas matches, because you've only got to look at the drip of narrative. And as soon as Real Madrid and Barcelona start to play a couple of games in the States, I guarantee this will happen. The owners will come on and say, "We don't really want to go and play there, but they're making so much money, the Spanish clubs, that if we don't do that, we're going to fall behind them. So we're doing it for the best interests of the club." And a load of fans will swallow that nonsense. And yes, I know some fans will make a huge effort to get to it, but we're already being rinsed in terms of what we're expected to pay to follow our clubs. You look at the price of merchandise, you look at ticket prices, transportation is a shambles in this country, and it's an expensive shambles as well. So you put all of those factors together. We as fans, and I'm not being rude here, we're both fans of a certain age. We're not as young as we once were. We've outlived our usefulness to Premier League owners, because if I go to watch Brighton, and Brighton aren't a good example because they do need this, because you're not going to find 30,000 people spontaneously walking up to the Amex on a Saturday afternoon. But Liverpool could get rid of all their season tickets. Manchester United could get rid of all their season tickets. Arsenal could do the same, and they could still sell out every match because it's a tourist attraction. And if I'm a Manchester United season ticket holder, and let's say that I'm paying on average £35-40 a match to watch them at Old Trafford, I can guarantee you that the tourists are willing to pay 80, 100, 150. Because if I go to watch a match, very occasionally I go to the United States, if I go to an NBA game, if I go to an NFL game, my first reaction is, "Jesus Christ, how much are they asking me for?" And anybody that's been to any concerts over the course of this summer, even for bands who you wouldn't say are top tier royalty, you're still getting absolutely fleeced. So the mentality of American owners is, we're not interested in football. We just see football as being part of the entertainment industry, and ticket prices in the entertainment industry are very high. We don't want season ticket holders because we see them as bed blockers. If you go, you're going to buy the home shirt, you're going to buy the away shirt once a season. That means on 17 or 18 times as you go to the ground, you're not going to be spending anything on merchandise. Whereas if you've got the tourist fans come up, I don't know whether you've ever been to see Leeds play at Spurs, but the Spurs megastore, they hold back tickets for the South Korean fans because they tend to be wealthy. They are obsessed with Son, understand, he's a great player and all that. And every single one of them walks out of that megastore with 2 carrier bags filled to the brim. They've got all 3 shirts. They've all got Son's name on. They've got the training gear. They've got the Son lampshade. They've got the Son duvet cover. You name it, they've bought it, and they've paid ridiculous prices for them because, let's face it, the quality of the merchandise is a bit crap.
Yeah, we've a lovely yellow shirt that we've launched this year with the return of our smiley badge from the 70s, which is a beautiful, beautiful kit. And I bought it. I live in Ireland, and I bought it. And by the time I hit checkout, it was €101 before it got to me. That's one shirt. If you think of families with kids trying to buy kids their shirts every year, and it's 2 or 3 kits and the name on the back of them and everything else, you're talking hundreds. But we know football's a money game now. Unfortunately, it's PSR, for example, being talked about more than even football is being talked about right now. So it's a slippery stuff, but I really appreciate answering those questions for me. The last question I have for you relates to Leeds United. It's a really short one. How important is promotion for Leeds this year?
I'd still, it's a bit like those job adverts where they say this particular skill is desirable but not essential.
Yeah.
So yeah, can you do Excel? Can you do blah blah blah? If Leeds don't get promoted, no, yeah, it's not what you're looking for. Will it put the existential future of the club into question? I don't think so, because terrible thing to say, Leeds have loads of inventory that they can sell. In terms of, they've still got a very talented squad. They've got players who went out on loan last season that perhaps they could still sell, this window or next summer or whenever needs to be. So it will be a climatization issue once more, because the big issue is that your parachute payments more than halve next season. They go down from around about 34 million to probably about 14 or 15. So it's another 20 million pound drop. Just get promoted and don't worry about it, is my advice. But get promoted for the joy of being promoted, not for money.
Yeah. Well, you're always worried about, well, if we don't go up, that's the next set of players we've got gone next season. Yes. Then whatever you're left with is rebuilding again and again and again. So, Kieran, massive thanks for joining me today to have this discussion. I really, really appreciate it. I hope it's answered most of the questions for a lot of the fan base. It's calmed me down a little bit anyway from the weekends things. So really appreciate that. And have a cracking rest of your day, Kieran. I really appreciate you joining me. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. And